Grow, Sell, and Retire is the podcast for the lazy overachiever. B.D. Dalton, author of The Assisted Purchase, True Gravity, and Grow, Sell, and Retire, is here to give his 25 years of secrets, tips, and assistance to take your business to the next level. This podcast is for anyone who wants to sell more, work less, and make better business. Now, here's your host, BD, with today's GSR podcast.
Hello, everybody. BD Dalton here, Grow, Sell, and Retire podcast. Really excited about today's show. I have Russ Hill with me, but I'm going to kind of introduce him for a second because I kind of see Russ Hill as the chairman. I've got books set in front of me, including one from Coach, one from Laura Carstensen, one from Tim Noonan, one from Jeff Belcora, but essentially huge amounts of people that have all been brought together by Russ, and now he's written his book, Optimizing Longevity. So we're going to talk today. So Russ, welcome to the program and looking forward to talking to you. So tell us a little bit about you and your background.
Sure. Thanks, BD. Glad to be here. So I've been in the business of what we now call wealth management for now 55 years. So I'm getting an edge of understanding it. I started back when it was basically a brokerage company and turned it into financial planning and then wealth management. And it's really been a lot of fun. And I think in terms of the book, Optimizing Longevity, but the whole idea of longevity is if you can figure out something that you like to do and you keep doing it, that's a great way to live a longer and healthier life because you're doing something with purpose. So we just yesterday were noticed that for the, I think, 6th or 8th year in a row, I can't remember which, we rated one of the best places to work in the United States in financial services. And actually, our CEO's compensation depends on continuing to win those kinds of awards. So we like that a lot, and it's been a lot of fun. So I'm looking forward to our conversation today. I don't know much about UK rules in terms of finance. I know there's some differences and some similarities, but so if I step off a curb and run in front of an oncoming car, I didn't look left or whatever it was.
That's good. No, today, but really, it's more talking about less about the financial side and more about what people should plan for in their life. When you talk about it in Optimizing Longevity, it's not the old thing is. So it used to be we would look at retirement as a gold watch and a 65 and you're out the door. You're a little bit older than 65, and
I hardly even remember 65 at this point. Yeah.
That's classic, but it used to be that. So
right.
When you first started off, what did you, because it's all 55 years in this industry and everything else and helping other people retire and do whatever they did. What does it look different now for you than you thought it would when you started in the industry or in business?
I think like most people, yeah, it wasn't so much a gold watch because I've pretty much developed my own business and worked for myself. So you got a gold watch from a big company, but realistically, retirement was sort of invented in this last century, toward the middle of last century. We didn't really have retirement. People worked and then Social Security in the U.S. came in, and I know post-war in UK, different systems came in. So we really thought of it as a time to sort of relax. And I think most people, myself included, probably had sort of a golden haze. You thought, okay, I'm going to hit 65 and then things will be great, and I'll go on for a little while. In my particular case, further along, this isn't when I started, but my own mother, and I don't know if I ever told you this story, my mother decided to go to work when she was 65. She never had worked. My dad didn't want her to work.
Wow.
She wanted to become a travel agent, and she became a travel agent and worked from age 65 to age 96.
Wow.
In which case, she died 2 weeks after she quit working and made sure that everybody she had open had their trips planned, and then she went off. So her mother died at 101 learning Spanish in case she needed it someday.
Wow. That's amazing. In case you needed it.
I had a little different view of what longevity might do in that regard. But I do think the important thing, and the shift has been that life isn't linear anymore. You know, you'd go to school, you'd work for the same employer, and you'd retire, as you say, to a gold watch or whatever the equivalent was for you. And that's clearly not the case anymore. And the origin of the book was actually work done at the Stanford Center on Longevity that's sort of relevant, I think, to a lot of your listeners. And the idea was, when you're thinking of longevity as the way I think you should think of it, which is lifetime. It's not just post-retirement. It's not just aging. It's what happens with early childhood education, what happens with early training and learning, what happens with multiple jobs. When you think of it that way, I use the analogy of a road atlas. The actual new map of life that came out of Stanford was for policymakers. It was for people to think about what we needed to change in terms of education and laws and all that stuff. And I wanted to make it a little bit how an individual would take these same ideas and think about those different areas. So as to give context to longevity instead of just thinking, oh boy, I'm going to live longer. And I think for most of us, certainly for me, I'm much less concerned with the length of life than with the quality of life and the quality of health. And, you know, they say now that a lot of the researchers in medicine are targeting being healthy up until 2 weeks before death. And I said, I would prefer 20 minutes, but 2 weeks, I'll take it. You know, if you can have a relatively healthy life and do a lot of the things you want to do, whether it's post-retirement or shifting your retirement, that's really the goal. So,
and yeah, definitely. But when you're starting to plan that, so if we go to you have the business owner point of view. So if you put both hats on for me, is the business owner point of view, and now you've moved into this chairman role and you've put a CEO in place and you've put in systems and things like that. What are some things from the business owner point of view? And then the other side for me is, what do people need to be thinking about as business owners talking to their professionals, their financial advisors, things like that. So if we go first from the business owners still wanting to have possibly their name on a spot, engaged in board meetings and things like that, what are some transitions that people are getting wrong by fully retiring possibly?
Yeah, I think if your audience is mostly the people who are the founders and primary owners of businesses,
yes,
then they have the opportunity to guide the business in a way that works for them, which I started doing a couple of decades ago, actually. And to me, that means you're thinking about, do you really enjoy the business or aspects, or what aspects do you enjoy about the business and what do you don't like? So very early on, I decided things I didn't like and I gave them to other people to do, but also retained enough influence and control that I get to decide now what I want to do. That takes a long time to get there. So for the business owner, I'm going to go to the second part of your question because it's related, I think. It's a very good idea to talk to professionals about all sorts of things, like what is it that you really want to do? I know you provide coaching, and that really it's a critical part to think about. What do you want to do? What does your spouse want to do? It's a pretty good idea to get out of the way early because you know who's in charge.
Yes.
And so if you get those early on, you can begin to guide the business structure and your succession planning, or if you're going to sell or whatever you're going to do, to leave you the room to do what you want to do. If you haven't thought about what it is you want to do, that is unlikely to work out in the best possible way. So that's why I think looking at in context and in the what I call the off ramps, and you've thought about as pit stops along the road. What you really want to do is whenever you're coming up to one of those, you really want to look around and see who's actually done this before. Sometimes these off ramps are unintended, things like divorce or bad health or family issues. But there are counselors that they've been there before, you know, the first thing you should be doing is looking for people that have actually done this before. Maybe they're professionally attuned to things, and they can help you. Don't try to go through it by yourself. And so, whether it's financial or emotional or health or anything else, and I think it's very clear that as longevity continues to increase, particularly for well-educated and or upper-income people, it's actually, it might be interesting to know, it's actually education more than income, but as that continues to develop, you really have it at the traditional retirement age of call it 65 or early 60s, whatever it is. You probably have 30 years. And frankly, you might even have more now. We don't know all these new treatments and, wonder stuff. Most of that's kind of hot air still. Yes. But there's a lot of it, and some of it's real. So it's going to allow you to be healthy, I believe, a lot longer. So what do you want to do with that time?
And so you've done, those are great from a professional point of view. When you were asking people, and you and I both dealt a lot with Jeff Belcora. And so what do you think some better questions that people either can ask of themselves or can ask of their spouse?
Have somebody ask them, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, as you know, with Jeff's system, and we actually have in the Journal of Financial Planning, there's an article, 2015, I think that's right, which is on how you ask these questions, and it is based on us. And the interesting part of this, to get to these issues, in what Jeff actually came up with, and as you well know, it came from cancer patients at UCSF. And the idea that if you went into a doctor and you got a diagnosis of a dread disease, particularly cancer, that you really couldn't hear what the physician was saying to you. You probably didn't know the words anyway, but I mean, you really couldn't listen to it. So they started by having medical students go to the meetings with you, et cetera, et cetera. What we found out in asking questions is, one, it is better to do it with somebody over the phone than in person. And the reason for that is you're not taking physical cues. Even when you're on Zoom, I can see you and I can see whether you're responding to what I'm saying. Mm-hmm. But whether you're responding is not really what I'm thinking necessarily.
Correct.
Right? And so if you do this over the phone and you do the triage that Jeff talks about, which is asking questions and then going deeper, than saying, is there anything more, and then doing this again and again, you really get to a much deeper understanding. And what we found is that people, and particularly doing it together with spouses, one, a lot of times spouses have never really talked about what they really want to do, other than it'd be nice to have a second home or nice to go sailing or whatever, but they haven't really gone through what all the implications of that are. What are the financial implications? What are the family implications? So you want to sail around the world, but you have relatives who are not in good health and you don't want to leave them. Mm-hmm. Have you had that discussion? Well, if you go through this in detail, you'll get there.
Yeah.
And so it's not an easy process, and it's kind of funny that it's iterative, as you well know. You have to go back and forth, and you have to think about this for a long time, and you get to know people better. But that's why financial planning today is not really that simple. It's not a straight line, and it's not just the people you're talking to; it's their whole extended family.
Mm-hmm. So. And you've been leaning in this, but I think one of the best things I read in this, not best, but one of the things that's really hit home recently, lots of people losing other people, is health as an asset, and walking through. So kind of you get people to retire and go back to the 65 model, and then they were expected to die by 67, according to Social Security. So right. We were only going to have to pay for them for 2 years. Right. So you get so many people, I'm sure Halbert Hargrove and we've had it, where people retire and then they actually can't physically do anything because they've drained themselves so much. So if we're now working till 60, what's something that people should be business owners and other people should be building into their overall longevity plan?
Well, I think you hit on it in the sense that as early as you think about it, if it's not native to you, I mean, there are people that obviously get into business who were, let's say they were athletes or something, and they continue to be athletes. But leaving that aside, the sooner you think about health being one of your primary assets, and for most people, up until the point when maybe they would have retired otherwise, their biggest asset is in fact human capital, right? And human capital goes away if you can't work and you haven't kept up your learning, those two things. So as soon as you think about it, start your own health program. And one of the things that I think is, I mean, there's a lot of quackery in the longevity business, but typically your grandmother was right. Eat well, sleep enough, get enough exercise, and don't worry in exercise about whether you get 10,000 steps or 7,500 steps or some number that somebody made up. By the way, those are all made up numbers. Yeah. I don't know if you know that. The 10,000 steps came from a weird thing in Japan that people quoted, and they thought it was science, but it's not. So get up and exercise. My wife and I made it. What we're not quite sure might be a terrible mistake. We just got a puppy about 14 months ago. Oh, no. And she's killing us. Yeah. Killing us. But I mean, we're up every morning at 6 o'clock. I take the dog out, and so if I were thinking about being lazy and staying in bed, it doesn't work. I think that's a critical thing. And a lot of people think, well, I'm 55. I'm not going to be an athlete again. It's not relevant. Go take a walk. Get off the couch. Make little changes in your diet. You don't have to change everything, and you don't have to eat all green vegetables and never have any meat again or anything like that. Just, be reasonable. And your health can improve a lot. And with a lot of this, particularly some of the current wonder drug are these weight loss drugs, which now, in fact, seem to have all positive almost all positive. Sometimes they affect your digestion, but they're actually getting cleared by the FDA for cardiac treatment to actually improve heart function.
Isn't that amazing?
Yeah, it's amazing, and it's all good stuff. So you've got a chance with a lot of this coming out that'll be helpful. But what you can do yourself is reasonably try to improve on all these areas. Where think about your sleep habits. Think about how, I hate to say this, how much you drink. That's a tough one.
we know how much we drink. Is it supposed to be limiting the amount, or is it? Yeah.
Well, yeah, but be reasonable. In fact, and also for business owners, step back and think analytically about what you read. I'll take the drinking as one of them. It turns out, of course, that red wine isn't necessarily good for you, but it's a little bit bad for you unless you drink an enormous amount. But if you look at the statistics, you have to actually read the statistics, which the newspapers usually don't get right, because while it increases your risk of all-cause mortality, it increases it by 4 or 5% from a very low level to still a very low level. But the headline always says it's bad for you. Well, not really.
And it could double your chance of heart disease, but that's going from 4% to 8%.
Yeah,
but it's still doubling.
It's not even that much unless of course, if you drink a lot.
If you do anything in excess, it can be
anything in excess. That's right. And so, look at those things. Actually read through and pay attention. And you don't have to do it all the time. But when you see something like that bothers you, the U.S. has a great example of something that was damaged a lot of people, and that was the use of hormones and its effect on breast cancer.
Okay.
And millions of women didn't take hormone treatments because it increased your risk of breast cancer. except it literally increased it. They said 25%. It did. It increased the risk from a 4% to a 5% chance.
Mm-hmm.
And so millions of people had decades of discomfort for something that if they'd known what that number meant would have gone, what? Even physicians didn't know. Now they do, but
yeah.
So you have to look through that stuff and say, okay, if I were going to walk 10,000 steps a day, what happens if I walk 5,000 steps a day? What happens technically is you get about 85 to 90% of the benefit of walking 10,000 steps.
Mm-hmm.
So
then, like you talk about in chapter 7, and this is something near and dear to both of our hearts, is building the financial security from the start. So if somebody's listening to this and they're 40 years of age, and the thing that you and I typically hate to hear when they say, I'm going to retire, and you say, where's your retirement plan? They say, you're standing in it, the family business or the store or restaurant, right, or whatever it is. So how do people start building their foundations from the beginning to start that, even just savings or things like that? So what should they be thinking about as a business owner?
Well, I think there's two basic things, or two different areas that you'd be thinking about. One is that all the traditional stuff that we think about investing generally is true. You start as soon as you can, you diversify, you save relatively continuously, and you really want to start that even if it's at a very low level. The moment you start thinking about it, start contributing. And be diversified, and don't try to hit a home run. A lot of business owners tend to think, and you know as well as I, that the fallacy called the illusion of control. They think if they're running something, it's going to be good. The risk isn't as high for me because I'm doing it. Well, not true. The risk is still there, and so you want to continue and diversify alongside building your company. Now, having said that, it's easy to say, and many years ago, I borrowed a lot of money to start this business, and I realized how difficult it is. But you can still begin saving something. And the compounding effect, as you well know, the compounding effect, if you start at 25 or 30 or 35, is enormous. So if you're 40 and you haven't started, start. That's start.
Yes.
And use whatever you can do. Tax-wise, in terms of if there are retirement plans that you can put into the company, et cetera. If you can't, just do it outside. The other thing that's part of that in my mind is that because human capital is such an important part of your lifetime net worth. In fact, it's for most of us, it's what actually creates all of the net worth that you have. You really have to start thinking about protecting the human capital that you have. How do you protect human capital? Well, you do it in two fundamental ways. One, you have insurance, or three, let me make it three. You have insurance to the extent you can have disability and life insurance and things like that.
Yep.
Long-term care insurance. And I believe you should use those as much as you can afford to use them. I mean, you have to balancing it out. You should have bigger reserves. Traditionally, financial planners always say, don't hold any cash because cash is a drag. How many times have you heard cash drag in investment?
Yep.
Always. I view cash, and I think I said in the book, cash is an option premium. When you pay an option premium, you expect that the premium sometimes will expire worthless, but on balance, you expect to make something from the options over time, right? Mm-hmm. Well, when bad things happen and you have some cash, it really helps. So keep a little bit more cash than people say. And then the other thing in terms of your human capital, continue to learn throughout life. You have to keep up in whatever field you're in with whatever's going on. You have to, and it's going to be easier and easier. You can do all this through the internet now. You've got artificial intelligence to help you learn things. It's going to be easier and easier. And because it's easier, other people are going to be doing it. So if you want to be competitive when you're 70 years old, you should be thinking about staying current. by using, whatever could be the local university, it could be the internet, it could be however you want to do it, but you have to stay up with things. And in my business, I have continuing education requirements.
Yes.
Actually, 50. There's 3 different ones I have to do. I think it's 60 hours a year of additional training. So they make you go do this. Mm-hmm. It's very useful. I think it's great.
And so if you're looking at people that have gone longevity besides mom and grandma, so who else do you kind of look up to or envy that are in your peers or other people that you could name?
Well, the classic is Warren Buffett, who's 94. Actually, I knew Charlie Munger. He died, just at 100. In our own firm, it was a small brokerage firm. We had people that retired in their mid-90s when I was coming up, and I thought it was wonderful. We're still, industry is still affected by ageism.
Yes.
Clearly. And, the reality is that older workers are not better or worse than younger workers. They're just different. Mm-hmm. They may not have the same technical skills or the same ability to pick up new things quickly, but what they have is wisdom of having done bad things before. I always like to say experience means something I don't have to do again.
That's right.
And, it's very helpful. And so what we have in our firm, for example, most of our teams are pretty well age diverse. We have people in their early 70s and people in their late 20s working together on a client team. And they do different things, but if you have respect for what the other person can do in the interaction, it's really, well, the demonstrations are that it actually works. And so I think there's a lot of people. There are obviously in some industries it's a lot easier. If I were had to carry, heavy stones as a mason right now, I'm not sure. Although I had an uncle that was a mason until he died of cancer, but he was a mason until he was 78.
Wow, that's a good innings.
He's a tough old guy.
So when you were making let's do 2 transitions. One, the first time when you started to build the systems and the people and handing stuff off, what was the hardest thing that you handed off first? If you remember back to the day that you said, this is hard, like client work, or what was the hardest thing to let go of because it wasn't Russ that was going to be doing it?
Yeah. For me, it was not hard to hand off the client work because they got really good focus from the younger people who were there, and I still would meet with people. Although a couple of long-term clients asked if I was still alive, but which are questionable. The hardest thing to hand off. Well, when you start a business, and you know this as well as I do, when you start a business, you're probably able to do everything in that business better than everybody else. You're the one that, I could fix the copy machine and do all that. And we rather quickly, decades ago, got to the places where I couldn't do that anymore. And that was uncomfortable for a while. I mean, I had to give myself a good talking to on a couple of occasions, just, get out of the way, let somebody else try to solve the problem, recognize that they're very likely to make some mistakes, but I was very likely to make some mistakes too. So it's not like, if I'm going to do it, it's perfect. And getting to that transition where you cannot do everything that everybody else can do. And now we have a lot of, with our IT guys and all of the technical stuff, I can turn my computer on, but I'm not the guy to program things. Mm-hmm.
And then if we're looking at it from the now career path sort of view, if you were to look back at Russ's career path through Halbert Hargrove and all the other stuff, what would you have done differently? Not on the handing stuff off to people, but like time at work versus holidays versus time studying versus sabbaticals. So what would you have done differently on your roadmaps or your atlas?
I would have, one thing would have changed me, although I have done the vacations and things all along and volunteerism. I actually, back in the early 90s, starting in the early 90s, so that's a long time ago now, started doing a lot of volunteer work. So I've actually done a quarter to a third of my time has been on volunteer things. I've had some big projects, and the aquarium in Long Beach, which is one of the largest in the United States, I actually physically was in charge of building it, even though I didn't know anything about aquarium. It was a project. I didn't have, up until I was probably in my late 40s, I didn't have enough confidence in my own ability that people would follow me. So we did a lot of business deals with other people where we put money with them. And finally, I decided to do that internally and build the firm internally. And that was very helpful. I made the commitment when I started doing that, though, that I was not going to not take vacations. And so it's pretty interesting. Let's just say that I was functionally bankrupt is technically the right term, by borrowing money to start the business and leasing some very nice office space and things like that. And we would still take vacation. I'd spend time with. I never missed any of our son's athletic events, my daughter's drama, and went to all of those. I think you have to decide what's important, and so I wouldn't have done that any differently. I might have taken even more time. I'm not sure, but I had to get that. I had to get to that level where I ended up with enough self-belief. I call it in the book self-efficacy, and I think that's the right term. It comes from Albert Bandura, who liked to say he was the fourth most quoted psychologist in the world, and the other three were dead.
Yes.
He was a great guy. But if you don't have self-belief, you can't do anything. If you do have it, you still have risks and luck and probability and all that stuff. But you got to have that first. And I should have had more, but shoulda, woulda doesn't do it until something happens and you decide you've got it, and then you decide you can do things. And so I've started a lot of things since then, and some of them have worked and some haven't. But
so two things now. So before, as we wrap up, why now did it take you this long to write the book when you sat around all these amazing authors that you've brought through, worked on their things, been their best friends with Coach, with Tim, with Belcora, with all these people? Why now?
Why now? Well, I didn't actually set out to write a book. I did, in fact, at the Stanford Center on Longevity. I was the guy that instigated the meeting that created. There was actually a very large meeting by invitation, about 50 people from around the world, and some academic and a lot of business people, to think about the first round of the new map of life. We weren't calling it that. And then I also instigated the meeting a year later to begin to organize it. And then we ended up at the Center on Longevity actually hired 9 PhDs to actually look at the different areas, and they studied them. So that was the project. And then as that began to sort of marinate and I started to think about it, I realized that, and when the new map of life came out, was published, there's a lot of academic stuff, and then there was a summary. The summary is about 60 or 70 pages. It's worth looking at. I hired a fellow to do a graphic analysis of each domain. He was a retired Irish lawyer living in Melbourne, Australia, that considered himself a storyteller, but he did graphic art.
Yes.
So he created the graphics that are in the book, and Stanford uses them as well. I just gave it to them to use. So I realized I had all this fundamental stuff, but it was more at the policy level rather than something that our own clients could read or would read. I mean, they
Yes.
could have, all the stuff was out there, but they wouldn't do all that. So I decided to start putting it together, and I wrote the introduction and that kind of thing. Well, I guess I have to do the whole book. So I sort of forced myself. I didn't actually want to write a book. So I forced myself.
And going back to that overall, I mean, and we met now almost a decade ago, but so surrounding yourself with people that are in your industry that are surrounding that and all around the industry or all around thoughts that you like. So meet once a year, do all this type of stuff. What can people do to bring peers together that might cost them some time, might cost them some money, might cost them some human capital, but can expand their universe, their longevity, and that type of stuff? So what can people think about and do? Like
I know in our industry, we generally call them study groups, but I think what you can do in almost any industry is meet some like-minded people and think about issues that affect all of you, and you can create some way of coming together, and you have to be willing to provide value. And I think what that means is you have to be willing to put in money, time, effort. You have to be willing to share. And what we found in several of these different groups that meet is that people tend to be fairly open. They tend to tell the truth, and it's extremely valuable to actually get that kind of feedback. So sometimes you have to be geographically separated. You don't want to be too competitive. You don't want to have a guy that's got a shop right next to yours, maybe. But I think almost anybody can think about how to put that together, and you'll find most people are interested in participating in the sense, as you well know, because you deal with business owners and leaders, when you're the primary owner or the primary leader, who do you talk to?
Nobody.
You can't talk to anybody in the firm because they work for you, and their compensation is dependent on. So you can talk to them, but let's just say you're not going to get quite the straight scoop that you will talking to another business leader. And so I'm sure you put these people together sometimes, but I think that's extremely valuable. And when you get tired of being by yourself, you can go talk to other people. We actually had a group that got it started in the early 90s. It lasted for about 10 years. There were 4 firms that were similar to our firm, and we met, and they were spread around the country, so we really didn't compete. And we would get together and talk about anything, and it was so valuable to do. And we could call, if you had an issue, you'd call somebody up and say, "Hey, I've got this problem. What are you going to do? What did you do?" And you get the right answer. So I couldn't encourage people more to do that, both because the social interaction by itself is valuable. By the way, it's very good for your longevity.
Yes.
In that sense. But it's really great for helping you do well in your own business and having a good life. It's good for your mental health, so keep your health span going.
Very good. So here's the moment. So optimizing longevity, Russ Hill, the rewind moment. So drop one thing here now that if somebody only listened to the last minute, they would go, crap, I want to rewind and listen to the whole thing again. So what's your golden nugget from the golden nugget?
I would say this: rather than working on your money, working on your health and your social relationships, because those are the foundation of the money you have. Sure, you pay attention to the other things, but if you do that first, your family, your health, you can make the business part and the money part come out.
That's awesome. Russ, thank you so much for joining me on the Grow, Sell, and Retire podcast. It's been amazing.
Thanks. It's been fun.
Thanks for joining us on Grow, Sell, and Retire. For more information, tools, or to book one of our team members to work with your team, business, or to speak at your event or conference, visit rockfind.co.uk. If you like the podcast, you'll love one of BD's 3 books, The Assisted Purchase, True Gravity, and the book the podcast is based on, Grow, Sell, and Retire. If you want to work for the rest of your life, that is your business. If you don't, that is ours.